Welcome to No Church Answers, a weekly roundtable Bible discussion for men. We're not pastors, just regular guys talking about scriptures and their own spiritual journeys. And now, here's your host, Bill Cox.
Hello, I'm Bill Cox, and welcome to No Church Answers. We're not pastors, we're just regular guys, and each on our own spiritual journey. We feel all men are leaders of your family, leaders at work, leaders in your church and community, but sometimes that lead dog needs to be fed, spiritually recharged. That's why we're here. We're going to take a scripture, update it, put a man spin on it, and with our panel discussion, apply it to the challenges that men face daily. Our panel consists of the fellows of Man Up. I'm going to start with introducing, to my right, world-class policy writer and professional gambler. He's our producer, Mr. Steve Titch.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve. And next to him is logistics and hospitality specialist. We call him the evangelist, Earl Lloyd.
Hey, Earl.
Hey, Earl. And former prosecutor and attorney, so he could throw the book at you or he could defend you. We call him the judge, Michael Cropper.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Mike. I object. Right. World-class corporate trainer and theologian. We call him the professor, Robert Koshu.
Hello, Robert.
Hey, Robert. We are going to study swimming upstream, and we're taking this from Romans. And one thing about the great production notes that Steve Titch gave us is the main idea is that Christians are called in the scripture to be countercultural, and one of Jesus' primary missions was to challenge the culture of his day, and to see the encounter with the women at the well, numerous other confrontations with religious authorities of the day, in his reaction to lepers and others who were outcast. And so we're going to talk about today's challenges, and want to start by going to Professor Robert Koshu.
Thank you, Bill. And before we get started, I just want to say we're really happy that you've decided to join our show and enjoy and watch us. Hopefully we'll give you something you can take about it. So I'm going to start out by talking about why we call them No Church Answers. And we do that because church answers is what you answer when someone asks you a question. And it doesn't mean that the church answer is wrong, but it's understanding why there's a church answer that's given and understanding the reason behind your faith. So really, that's where the No Church Answers come from. We kind of talk that out, but we really want to challenge you with your faith as we give these answers and talk through the different things. What we want to start out with, as Bill said, we're talking about countercultural and swimming upstream. And I'm just going to kick it off by saying, when Christ came, he really came and challenged everything of that day. He challenged everything. One of the most countercultural statements of the day is actually found in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, where he started the Sermon on the Mount. And he started out with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." You know, when he talked about forgiving your enemies and praying for your enemies and following God. And blessed are the poor, because they would have those things. And so that's really where I think the countercultural starts out is in reality that look of difference that comes from following Christ.
Excellent. Steve Titch.
Well, as Christians, we're called to be countercultural. The thing is, there's a difference between countercultural and accepting parts of the culture you like and parts you don't. And that's what I think in some ways Christians sometimes tend to do. They say, I don't like that part, I don't like that. But the whole aspect of being countercultural means examining the whole culture. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus took a look at the whole culture, everything people took for granted, the social strata, the religious strata, the way everyone had a place in Judean society at the time. And we got to look today at that, because God inverts all that. That's all up for question. So we've got to be careful, and especially men have to be careful about what I call the culture of measurable productivity. Because that's something that I think in many ways we as a Western culture embrace as something good, and we as Christians seem to take that out of the secular culture and reinforce it. So I'll talk about that later.
Excellent. Michael Cropper.
No Church Answers and approaching culture from the biblical perspective. What about us? Well, men live in tunnel vision. It's a part of our DNA. When we hunted for food, it was necessary for us to focus on our prey and tune out everything that interfered with our concentration. Today, deer hunting reminds us of the focus we must exercise to attain our level of success in any occupation or in any profession. And today's culture promotes self-gratification over religious principles, which extols conduct which is ethical, moral, appropriate, and honors our Creator. It exhorts us to love our fellow man as we love ourselves. So our No Church Answers is the medium by which we provide individual experiences and understanding of the Bible and the principles we are to live by. The worldly view, the principles which guide our fellow residents who occupy the earth with us promotes self-gratification development. To them, the Bible is out of the question. Bill?
Excellent. Earl Lloyd.
The counterculture is what Titch makes mention of regarding what Jesus, and you know Jesus, and you look at the stories, he and I shouldn't say always, but he went against the status quo. And being countercultural, there has to be a boldness in reference to going against the crowd. When he healed on the Sabbath, and he was attacked regarding the Sabbath, but everything was about love and then obedience. And then what about the money changers when he went out and cleaned out the money changers? So as I will get into this later, but it's just going against, whenever you're going counterculture, more or less you are what we call here swimming upstream, is going against the crowd, and that is what I want to attack as we go through this broadcast.
Excellent, and we're so glad that you joined us. We're going to be taking a break here in just a moment, but talking about the way culture is, and especially the way men are, and I believe Mr. Steve Titch previously on one of our podcasts brought this up. Men worship work, they work at play, and they play at worship. We're going to discuss those themes a little bit later when we get back. This is No Church Answers.
What does the Man Up podcast mean to me?
What Man Up means to me?
Why do I like Man Up?
The Man Up group is a totally unique concept in adult Bible fellowship.
It's a way for men to learn to be leaders and to find ways to engage the world in the way we're described to as Christians.
It gave me an opportunity, it gave me freedom. It gave me freedom to share my experience with Christ. I've always wanted an opportunity to share Christ with people, and I look for them to ask me, but not a lot of people ask you. Instead, you have to volunteer the information when you get the opportunity, and you can either be rejected or you can be accepted and given the opportunity to share your walk with Christ.
The great thing about a men's group is that the dynamic is different. You're not with couples. You're not mindful of the impression you're making on others, or what your wife is thinking when she's sitting next to you. And you can talk about things you probably wouldn't feel comfortable with in a couples class.
Part of what we do at Man Up and what we're able to do is talk about how we as Christians are called to engage not only each other as men and encourage each other, but also talk about how we're leaders in our faith and how we're leaders in our circle of influence. And we take that and encourage each other and hopefully encourage you.
A Man Up class is a leadership experience because more often than not, a Man Up participant, once they get used to leading, they will seek out other opportunities in the church, in their family, in their community to be a leader.
As for what we're doing now, I'm really excited about the future. We're of course got our website. We've got our own nonprofit group going. We're getting ready to take our show on the road, so to speak. I like the idea of bringing the concept of a men's Bible study group to other churches, maybe as an inspiration, because there's really nothing like it.
In the meantime, weekly we do the Man Up podcast. We know that you'll be enriched for it.
And welcome back to No Church Answers. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and read the scripture. This is Romans 12, 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. I'm going to go ahead and update this and put a little man spin on that. I'm going to start with Mr. Steve Titch.
Yeah. First of all, I do want to point out that while I do the sometimes the notes for the podcast, the notes that you were reading did come from Robert, who really did the assembly of
this
these.
is collaborative all the way.
That's why they were so eloquent.
Nice.
Yes. Now, again, this whole idea that Paul talks about, and from that we get the being in the world and of the world. But really, it comes down to not nonconformity for nonconformity's sake, but really living according to God's way. We shouldn't be molding ourselves to the culture or molding our faith around the culture. We should essentially be approaching the culture from the point of view, of the vantage point of our faith. And now, we necessarily don't throw the whole thing out with the bathwater, the baby with the bathwater, but we've got to start examining everything. And as I said at the beginning, we can't be just diving into the culture and just saying, "Oh, I don't like that part of it about it," but accepting other parts. And that's, I think, where real Christian growth comes from: questioning things that you grow up with, things that you are kind of steeped in, and that's where I think we need to do our most work. We know what we don't like, but what are we conditioned to like that really is not the Lord's way?
Interesting. Professor Koshu.
So I like that, and it's interesting. And by the way, nothing I've written has ever been called eloquent before, so I'm going to probably quote you on that at some point. I think it becomes even more interesting because there's two phenomena that's going on right now that I think we have to address, and we have to think about in light of culture and being countercultural as far as going against the culture. The first is there's this group called the nuns, and this particular group, they're a group who express no religious belief at all. And the Barna Group got, and we'll have a little graphic that you could see and part of our show notes that you'll be able to see that describes the activities that they choose not to participate in as you go through. The second thing that's going on is generational. And it's really interesting because 59% of those Gen Zs, and that's anybody born after 1995, and 55% of the millennial group that was born between 1981 and 1995, they want to either move to a mix of pure digital, a high-end in-person, digital only, or forget it and throw it away. And the more interesting part, this study from the Barna Group, that Barna Group, this is a group who is actually the Gen Z and millennials they interviewed that were actually church raised. So this is a group that in the past, it was very traditional for men to drift away from church while they were in college in particular. And then they started marrying and having families, and they would come back together. What we're finding is that no longer is working. And so I think one of the things we have to think about, especially in light of this scripture where we're called to be of the world, in the world, but not of the world, is how do we impact that particular group as we're moving forward?
Oh, well, I'm going to go to Earl, because Earl has some younger children just like me. And I've encountered this with my own kids, and I told them that the whole reason that they feel this way is because they don't have the experiences of life. They don't have the maturity. They haven't buried a friend. They haven't buried a parent or a child. So there's no wonder in their life yet. They haven't had the experiences of life yet. So it's so easy for them to discount things of reverence. And so I've had, and I suppose I need to get off my soapbox, but I want to go ahead and go to Earl, because I'm sure he's had the same kind of discussions with his children.
And it's all about kingdom principles. It's all about bringing kingdom principles to politics, bringing kingdom principles to business, bringing kingdom principles to the law, and then bringing kingdom principles as to who you are. When Jesus, going back to some, even the stories, as far as the law, when I made mention about Jesus healing on the Sabbath, and it was all about taking care of people. When it came to business, I talked about the money changers earlier, but what about when Matthew left as far as being a tax collector, and it was all about him following Jesus? So again, how bold are you, and how affixed are you to following what you actually believe in?
Well, I believe that takes discipline, and I think that is one of the things in life that people aren't being taught, or they're not being receptive to it. It's not as common. I hate to sound like an old fogey, but I'm ex-military. Discipline's important, and it takes discipline to persevere. And
But people want it easy. The nuns want to be religious, but they want to sit at the cool kids table.
Well, the nuns don't want anything to do with it. It's the Gen Z and the millennials who have been in church. They want to. What they want to do is they want to do the opposite. What they want to do is they want to take and put the culture into the church. They tend to think that, well, it's and rightfully, and we'll talk a lot as we move through this show. You're going to hear us talk a lot about a group called the ex-evangelicals, and you're going to find out that I'm going to be one of the first ones to say they've got some good points, and then they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so they're a good group to really complex with, but they want to take the culture and put it in. They want to be in the culture and of the culture.
Exactly.
Is the problem.
There's a way to live, and what I wanted to get into is, and I talked earlier about the culture of measurable productivity. For men out there, the culture says, if you're not generating income, if you're not contributing to national GDP, then you're not leading some kind of meaningful life. I went to a Catholic prep school. The accent on was making as much money as you can, getting to a job, getting to an edge, getting to a college, getting to a master's degree, and making as much money as you can. And the guidance counselor was a Christian brother. He took a vow of poverty, yet he was always pushing people not into what they liked, not what their passion was, but really, you want to be like your parents. And I lived in Westchester County, and Westchester County was richer maybe than even Fort Bend County. It was certainly much less diverse than Fort Bend County, and probably still is today. So when men buy into that culture of measurable productivity, and that collapses, they lose that. Either they lose that job, they lose a marriage, they lose that meaning. And if they're in a church that reinforces that culture of measurable productivity, that's where the church fails them. And that's really where I think Jesus came in terms of nonconformity and turning things upside down. He doesn't want this kind of nose to the grindstone life for you.
The morals and virtues, a lot of things between Christians and the world, there are a lot of common overlaps. Okay? A lot of them are taught, like you said, to work, to seek out capital, and that overlaps with Christians. We're supposed to support our family. We are supposed to make money, provide a home for them. That fits into Scripture. The question is, now, let's keep going here. There is a different, Robert wrote us a list of things that the ex-evangelicals,
the nuns,
the nuns do, and you can immediately look at that take them out of the precept of the church. And by the way, there are church members who abide by the concept you were just presenting to us in precepts that we should make money, we should work hard, we should work too many hours or spend too much time. But anyway, the list that Robert provided said, for post-Christians, the first thing on the list is how do you determine these people are part of the crowd and the culture that promotes everything but religion? And he says, well, they don't believe in God. That's the first thing right there, and that's all you have to do. You can stop right there, right, guys?
Nice.
Or not born again. A couple things right there. The point is yes, I know some very strong people who don't profess Christianity. They may profess Muslim, they may profess other religions, and they have good hearts, and they give to poor people. But the question here is, like you said, you can preach all day in church about not going after money and not making it a priority. But if the person doesn't want to do that, they've got to want to do that. They've got to want to follow the principles of Christ. So one of the things and one of the points that we have in our lesson and production, which you provided for us and Robert wrote, was that how do you draw these people in, and how do you make them want to follow the principles of Christ? And that's simply not put money first, not put material possessions first, and things like that. Anyway.
And with that, we're going to go ahead and take our second break. We will be right back. This is No Church Answers. And welcome back. This is No Church Answers. We're going to go ahead and finish up this particular broadcast talking about the nuns and not conforming to the world. And go ahead and go back to Professor Koshu.
So the takeaway I have really from this as a church, we have to do better for men. We have a responsibility to really challenge a culture that tells us that sex, drugs, rock and roll, and filling our lives with stuff, that's what's important, and that's what's going to give our lives meaning. We have to find a way to show people how to find meaning through Christ and through faith, and that's really what we're called to do.
A wrap up from you, Michael Cropper.
Yeah, and we mentioned the culture of the world today. Robert's hit on a few points, Steve, everybody. And the thing I want to bring to you folks, do not look at the world and say, I want to be like them. And once again, these are the principles that are following self-gratification, drugs, sex, whatever it is. Do not do that. That is not a great virtue, a great moral to follow. Do not idolize the people who held up as leaders or who held up as leaders, like movie stars, political leaders, lawyers, doctors, unless they serve Christian principles, right? We lay everything people do and the people we want to hold in high esteem against the principles of the Bible. But do not derive your morals, ethics, work motivation, standard perception, pleasure, tolerance, motivation, if those standards are contrary to the principles set out in the Bible. Bill?
Excellent. Earl Lloyd.
We can actually take a page out of the nuns' book. One thing about the nuns, they are locked in as to doing what they do. And if we lock ourselves in reference to continue to push as far as not conforming to this world, and mind you me, we're gonna have people who not gonna be in, but I always look at it like this: they coming back, meaning just like the prodigal son. One thing about going out to the world, you coming back. So, but us as men, and I always like when Bill say at the end of these broadcasts, if you don't have one, start one up, start a man up, or start a prayer group. But you have to continue to just be locked in, just like the nuns.
Excellent, Steve Titch.
Well, I'm going to try to answer my own question here in terms of what are you going to do?
Buzz you right?
Thank you. We had to get that in.
Get the church answer.
Really, where it comes down to, and this is saying, if you really read the Bible, nuns don't read the Bible. They pull things out, and they pull. Oh, Jesus said all these nice things, and they wrote them all down, and he said, "Blessed are the meek." The people who wrote down all these nice things Jesus said also wrote down that he died and rose from the dead. And that's where we, I think, have to start understanding the whole countercultural aspect or the whole nonconformity aspect. We have to live every day in the belief that the resurrection happened. We believe, we take everything in this Bible and we take it seriously and we take it as truth. It all leads up to the miracle of the resurrection and this conquering of death. And I think if you look at the culture broadly, the court culture is existential. We go through it, we die, and maybe we go to, we think about going to heaven and maybe that's nice, maybe there's angels. But the world does not take what's in the Bible seriously. If we really want to challenge it, it doesn't. It does not take the reality that death is conquered, and it is a major step to believe that. But that's the essence of Christianity. It all inverts, and Jesus demonstrates that throughout his entire ministry, and that's why it's so important. Sometimes you can't answer these own questions, but to question everything, to question not just as you're saying, Mike, of course don't use drugs, don't fall in with the status and all the symbols and trappings of secular culture, but also take the Bible very seriously and live like it's the truth, not just like you're going to church every Sunday and filling up the disciplines you talked about. Right. Also, so that's really, like you said, stop playing at your worship, and really,
and great points by everybody. I just wanted to kind of end with what my children challenged me with, and the problem that they have with many Christians is that they legislate on the macro. They try to throw out blanket rules for everybody. And then I thought about how as a man, can I change that? It's very simple. Micro examples, examples that I can make for my children and in my community. Basically, and I think if you're a man out there, you understand this. Stay in your lane. Motivate where you can. And my name is Bill Cox. Thank you so much. And on behalf of the Man Up Spiritual Oasis for Men crew and producer Steve Titch, Michael Cropper, Robert Koshu, Earl Lloyd, my name is Bill Cox. And if you have any questions, you go to our Facebook page, which is manupspiritualoasis.com, and post it there. Thanks so much for tuning in to No Church Answers. We will see you next time.
You've been watching No Church Answers, a weekly roundtable Bible discussion for men, a production of Man Up Spiritual Oasis. Want more? Check out the Man Up Spiritual Oasis for Men podcast, available wherever you download your podcast. And to learn more about us and how to support our ministry, visit our website at www.man-upspiritualoasis.com.